Let's get to know selections. Selections are important because they allow you to isolate part of a layer so that you can work on that part without disturbing the rest of the image. Selections are particularly important when you have an image with one layer, like a typical JPEG photograph. In this movie, I'd like to show you some common use cases for selections so you know when and why you might use them, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how to use them in the rest of this chapter. One common use for selections is to cut something out of an image so you can use it in another image. Let's see how that works. In the toolbar, I'll select one of the selection tools. There are quite a few selection tools, and it doesn't really matter which one I'm using right now. We'll cover selection tools in a later movie. With this tool selected, the Object Selection tool, I'll move into the image and I'm going to drag over this woman. And Photoshop automatically selects her. The animated boundary that you see around her is called the marching ants, and that identifies the edge of a selection. Looking closely, I can see that I've also selected a little of the man's shoe. That's okay because this tool and most of the selection tools allow you to subtract from a selection. So there's a control for that, and I'll drag over his shoe. Great, now we have a selection. And the best news is that Photoshop did most of the work of making that selection for us. So now, what can we do with a selection? Well, let's cut this woman out, and then she'd be available to use elsewhere if we wanted to. To cut her out, I'm going to go to the bottom of the Layers panel and click this icon, the Add Layer Mask icon. And in just a moment, the rest of the image is gone from view, and we can see the gray and white checkerboard that represents transparency in Photoshop. And now I could drag this woman into another open document or copy and paste her to use her in another environment. Great, so that's one important use for selections, to cut out an object or a person. Another common use for selections is to isolate part of a layer so that you can change its appearance. And by that I mean anything from adding a filter, to making something brighter, to changing the color of something. Let's change the color of this woman's skirt. I'll drag over her skirt, and I might hold the Shift key and drag over this area to make sure I have everything selected. Now what can we do with this selection? I'll go to the bottom of the Layers panel. I'll click this icon that looks like a black and white circle, and from the menu that pops up, I'm going to choose Solid Color in order to create a layer of another color. That opens the color picker, which is the main place that you'll go in Photoshop to choose colors to work with. I'm just going to go with whatever color I have selected at the moment, this purple color, and click OK. So now her skirt is a solid color purple, but I want the folds of the skirt to show through. So for that, I'm going to use something called a layer blend mode, and we'll learn more about blend modes later in the course too. I just want to be sure you understand a common use case for working with a selection. So from this menu that's labeled Normal, I'm going to come down and choose the Color Blend Mode, and that does a great job of finishing up changing the color of her selected skirt. There are lots of other things you can use selections for. I just want to show you one more, something simple, which is that you can use selections to draw an outline and then create a new graphic that you can use in your image. I'll go back and click on the background layer, and then I'll go over to the toolbar, and I'm going to select this tool, the Elliptical Marquee tool. This is one of several selection tools that draw geometric shapes. I'll come into the image, and on the wall, I'm going to click, and then I'll hold Shift to constrain my selection to a circle, and I'm going to drag out a circle. And then I'll fill it with whatever color happens to be in my foreground color box at the moment by going up to the Edit menu, choosing Fill, and then clicking OK. And then to remove the marching ants, I'll press Command+D on a Mac or Control+D on Windows to deselect. And there's the beginning of something like a logo, perhaps. Just one more common use for a selection. So now that you have some idea of when you might use selections, let's go on to talk about how to use them.